So this morning we're talking about rent control and what it might look like in Providence. Steph Machado from the Boston Globe, Rhode Island, joining us this morning. She's been traveling around different areas, specifically Portland, Maine recently, talking about rent stabilization. Huge topic, obviously, all over the country right now. So you went up to Maine, you went up to Portland. What did you find, discover up there? How's it working in Portland?
Yeah, and I went up there because the Providence City Council is crafting an ordinance this fall. It was very tense between tenants and landlords. As you can imagine, they feel really differently about how rent control is going. Tenants say generally the rent is stabilized in the 5 years since Portland passed rent control, but it's still very expensive to live there. The rent doesn't go down, right? The landlords just can't
yeah, right.
jack up the rent by 10, 15, 20% anymore. Rent increases are limited in Portland each year to a number that's slightly less than inflation. Landlords, however, say it's really hurting their businesses. They say they're forced to raise rent to the maximum amount allowed every year because they know they can't do a big adjustment down the line, even when the unit is vacant. Some are even leaving the city altogether because they're fed up with the rent control system. Even the mayor of Portland, who supports rent control, told me it's been really complicated to manage, and Providence leaders will really have to roll up their sleeves if they do this.
So in your story, you explain that most cities have apartments that are exempt from rent control. So what is Providence looking at in terms of these exemptions? Yeah,
I mean, virtually everywhere that has rent control in the U.S. has this two-tiered system where some apartments are subject to rent limits and others are not. The Providence City Council President, Rachel Miller, tells me the City Council is looking at an exemption for newly constructed apartments for a period of time, basically trying to avoid what happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, where they implemented rent control and then housing construction plummeted. St. Paul ended up rolling back its ordinance to exempt any buildings built after 2004. Wow. In Portland, they don't exempt new construction, but they do exempt the so-called mom and pop landlords. So these are small multifamily homes under 4 units or less where the landlord lives in one of the units. So there's no one way to do this, and the council president tells me everything is on the table right now.
So Mayor Smiley in Providence has been opposed to rent control for many years. So are you anticipating a kind of a battle here in City Hall?
Oh yeah, I think there's going to be quite a political fight here, and I think that's why we haven't seen any language yet of the City Council's proposal, because they are trying to come up with something that can make as many people happy as possible. They will need 10 votes out of 15 to override a potential veto from Mayor Smiley. That's why I wanted to see how different policies were working in different cities. For example, in the state of Oregon, they allow rent increases up to 10%. An expert told me that's barely rent control at all. Mayor Smiley, for his part, has said the answer is to build more housing to help lower rents rather than regulating the rent price.
Yeah, that's right. More supply. All right, Steph, thanks so much for joining us. As always, you can read more about what Steph found in Portland, Maine right now at globe.com/Rhode Island.
Thanks, Pat.